me ask about 2003 when you were a host on MSNBC. You had an 8 p.m. talk show. It was a very big deal for MSNBC to hire you. You were up against Bill O'Reilly. You were trying to be the liberal Bill O'Reilly. Your program was canceled in February of 2003. Later, allyourtv.com found a memo from NBC that said you were a difficult public face at a time of war. In other words, your program was too anti-war. You were too liberal at the time, bringing on too many anti-war guests.
Right.
Is that truly what happened? Were you canceled because you were against the war?
Well, the memo was published by the New York Times. We were told that we had to have two conservatives on for every liberal.
I've rarely heard you speak about these times, this time when you were canceled, when your show was taken off the air. What do you think about nowadays? Do you reflect on that and feel that that you were censored?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about it in my mind, but I don't particularly want to go out and, they fired me. I mean, easy, big fella. The people coming home dead here, and you're complaining about losing your job.
So that's why you didn't speak much about it.
I've stayed small on that. But it is an interesting study, and I've thought about it, as you might guess, more than most people. It's an interesting study in corporate media.
MSNBC later pivoted very much to the progressive direction.
Yes, it did.
Keith Olbermann, Rachel Maddow, and others. The highest ratings still come from programs like Rachel Maddow's. But that said, that was a decision based on ratings. Your removal of your show was also partly based on ratings, right? It wasn't doing as well as they wanted.
It was also partially based on the fact that General Electric owned MSNBC.
The GE, a major defense contractor, also the owner of NBC.
And here you got this gray-haired talk show host on complaining about Donald Rumsfeld. He's their biggest customer.
NBC now owned by Comcast. Do you feel that's a better owner for NBC than GE?
When I was just let me take 1 second. This is important to me. I was a reporter in Adrian, Michigan for a radio station. I was a reporter because I said I was a reporter. I was the news director. I was the only member of the news department of this small radio station. And I was impressed with how powerful it was. I could stop the mayor, and I covered fires. It took no test to be the reporter. I didn't have to pee in a bottle. I just said I was a reporter. That's the way you want it. That way you get a whole bunch of reporters, because maybe then, somewhere in the collective middle of this large crowd will be found the truth. Today, that middle is occupied by 6 multi-billion-dollar multinational companies that are media companies, much more interested in the price of their stock, including Comcast, than they are in spending money that, for example, for an investigative report that may go nowhere and cost a lot of money and result in no copy. So, media does not want to rock the boat. Media is a boat. And until we get more Amy Goodmans, people who from the ground up are not worried about sponsor pressure, don't care if the White House calls them back. David Halberstam told me this. You can't cover Henry and have dinner with Henry. And Henry was, it's like fraternization in the military. You can get the brig for fraternizing with the enemy. They'll throw you in jail. That's because it's hard to shoot a guy after he's shown you a picture of his kids. Similarly...
So the coziness you're describing is what...
with far too many, and it's a problem because the media will say, well, we got to have our sources, and that's true.
Well, I'd like to have a lot of journalists. I'm okay with having journalists be friendly with sources, but then I want some other journalists to be much more adversarial. I want a mix of both. Let me ask you about something that just aired here on CNN in the last hour about the Iraq War, about 2003, because Fareed Zakaria has a documentary airing tomorrow about the legacy of our time in Iraq. He interviewed Tony Blair, and Tony Blair made some really remarkable comments about regret. Here's what he said.
I can say that I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we'd received was wrong. I can also apologize, by the way, for some of the mistakes in planning, and certainly our mistake in our understanding of what would happen once you removed the regime. But I find it hard to apologize for removing Saddam.
So what he's saying there is that he does express some regret about the intelligence being wrong, but not for removing Saddam. When you hear something like that from one of the architects of the war that you tried to speak out against, how do you feel?
Well, First of all, Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. Saddam was never a threat to this country. And what he's saying was, I'm sorry, the intelligence was wrong. Don't blame me. This is what you get when you don't obey the Constitution. The framers were right. It's too much of a temptation to give to one man. That's why you want Congress to vote up or down. They don't do that anymore. It's too dangerous politically. So they just go, here, Mr. President, if you think you have to, go ahead. That way, if he goes ahead, they can say, well, we thought he said, which is what Tony Blair is doing right there. It's a cover your butt strategy.
Donald Trump said this morning he thinks we'd be better off if Saddam was still in power. What do you feel? How do you, let me back up. What do you make of Donald Trump's presence in this race? I ask because you're a television legend, and Trump learned about television for 10 years on The Apprentice. So right. you must see that reflected in his campaign, right?
Well, I learned a long time ago, during the 29 years we were on the air.
Yeah.
You have to entertain the people. And that's what Donald Trump is. Also, this is a fascinating phenomenon in American politics. What I find most interesting is the crowds he draws. Mm-hmm. They're all white.
Mostly white.
Almost exclusively. Sure, you're going to always. I mean, it's a big country, and we have lots of ethnicity here, more than any other nation on earth. But it's a white crowd, Brian. They're South. They're Rocky Mountain West, and they're scared, and they're very angry. And finally, they've got somebody speaking for them. And he's up against all these gray figures in the same kind of clothes and the same, boring ties and black dark suits. He's like a guy with a top hat and cane jumping out of a cake, and he's riveting, and he owns media. You guys can't the reliable sources can't wait to put him on either their front page of their newspaper, and remember this about the reliable sources: the coin of the realm. And you know this, Brian. I don't mean to patronize you here. The coin of the realm is the size of the audience.
For sure. So I wonder, do you wish you were back on TV every day? Would you like to have a regular perch again?
Well, if I were on TV today, I guarantee you I'd have Donald Trump on my show.
I bet you would.
So I have to acknowledge this.
I would love to see you interview Trump someday.
Well, I'd love to have the opportunity, but we never got along when he did. He was on my show a couple of times.
Didn't get along?
He was a hot dog man.
In the meantime, it's a real thrill to have you on the program.
Well,
thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Pleasure.
And a reminder about that documentary I mentioned, Fareed Zakaria's documentary, Long Road to Hell, America in Iraq. It airs tomorrow night, Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time here on CNN. Coming up here on Reliable Sources, a clash of the titans, the New York Times versus Amazon. But is this actually a proxy war for a much larger battle? And later, a whole new ball game for the NFL and Yahoo, the first ever free live stream of a game. But will fans rush in to see it?